Porphyrogenitus was a Greek word that was somewhat of a slang term. It meant born to the purple. It's a bit like born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Purple, a rich and rare color to produce a dye for, was understood in many ancient societies, Egyptian, Persian, Roman, Greek, to be the color of royalty. The last queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, was a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a descendant of Ptolemy and Cleopatra and Ptolemy and Ptolemy. Real talk here, guys, these guys were really phenomenally terrible at naming their children. They were also really bad at not fucking their brothers or murdering their children, so that's maybe for a different day, though. Cleopatra, the famous queen, not to be confused with Cleopatra, or Cleopatra, of course, actually already had some children when she was defeated by the first Roman Emperor Augustus. She had twins with Mark Antony, a boy she named Alexander, after Alexander the Great, and a girl she named Cleopatra. Fucking hell. This Cleopatra Selene, eventually married King Juba of Mauritania, who, as well as being a king, was somewhat of a scholar and somewhat of a businessman. He had figured out how to make a purple dye from shellfish, and of course, this meant he could make the purplest purples you've ever seen. Together, they had a boy and a girl. The boy was called Ptolemy, because of fucking course he was, and the girl's name has been actually lost in the historical records, but you know what I'd put my money on it being? Drusilla, because I think that's a lovely name. So eventually, Ptolemy of Mauritania grew up and began to rule Mauritania, at the time a client state of Rome, and you bet he had the purplest purples you've ever seen, and he was quite possibly able to make a good buck selling his purples to kings and queens who wanted to show off just how purple they could be too. One day, he went to visit his second cousin, the Emperor of Rome, to talk politics and possibly show off his purples. According to popular account, the crowds in Rome were struck by the amazing purples that Ptolemy had to show off when he went to meet the emperor. The emperor, at this time, was Caligula. And if you know anything about Roman history, you can already guess how this story goes. So, there ended the Ptolemaic dynasty. Marvel has, in case you hadn't noticed, a bit of a thing for sympathetic villains. They want you to care about both sides of a conflict. Vincent D'Onofrio's Wilson Fisk brought an entirely new dimension to the character of the Kingpin that had been flat in many ways before. Michael Keaton's casting as the Vulture was not only great because of his great performance and the perspective of the character gave on Tony Stark's neglect of the working class, but also, on some level, just because Michael Keaton was Batman, and now he's a bad guy. One of their best villains, if not their best villain, to date, however, is Eric Killmonger. Killmonger is really scary, but at the same time, very charismatic, and given the historic and ongoing oppression of black people in white society and worldwide, his message of a black revenge on white people is honestly not that hard to get behind. Not just that, but they gave him the most relatable attribute possible. He's called Eric, just like me. How did you know, Marvel? Ryan Coogler, director of Black Panther, did an excellent breakdown of the casino scene. One of the things that really struck me was how he talked about the use of costume color.
You'll see, nobody else in this sequence is wearing the color red. Nobody else in the sequence is wearing the color green. Folks who are familiar with the concept of Pan-Africanism, the Pan-African flag is red, black, and green. So when you see T'Challa and Nakia and Okoye in their covert looks, you see the colors of the Pan-African flag. Again, you'll see the color story here with Chad in Black, the Black Panther. Another bit of color story in the film. This is one of our villains here, and this is Ulysses Claw. The color blue. The color blue represented colonization.
The white characters wear blue, and Killmonger wears blue, a symbol of what Ngugi wa Thiong'o would call colonization of the mind. The subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, ways in which a colonizing society makes a person from a colonized group continue their own subjugation internally. Killmonger, of course, marks himself with a little scar for every life he takes.
I lived my entire life waiting for this moment. I trained, I lied, I killed. Just to get here. I killed in America, Afghanistan, Iraq, I took life from my own brothers and sisters right here on this continent. And all this death, just so I could kill you.
In a society that privileges white people, a white supremacist society, the system is inherently violent to people of color. In Decolonizing Dialectics, George Ciccariello Marr wrote,
"For those relegated to non-being and condemned to invisibility, to even appear is a violent act, because it is violent to the structures of the world and because it will inevitably be treated as such."
While in white supremacist societies, black skin is an inherent and inescapable violence because of the way the society is constructed against black people. Killmonger wears his violence on his skin, and it covers most of his body. The scars represent people he has killed, so in a way, are symbolic of the violence of appearance that Ciccariello Marr talks about. But at the same time, they are scars, because Killmonger is physically harming himself. This could be seen as representing the violence that black people do to themselves to mitigate the violence of their appearance. James Baldwin, the author, said in an interview,
"Then inevitably, and one sees this at once in the faces of the people you're dealing with, it means that if I'm not what he takes me to be, that means I have a standard of judgment which is not his, which I may then be using to judge him.
And which may cut the ground from under all the standards.
All the other, yeah, exactly.
Do you regard this as a distinct threat to the, what shall I call it, the sense of spiritual security, American?
I think the Americans essentially, I don't think this, I know this. Yes, this is a threat to the American personality as it has so far been constituted. It's a threat to it is a threat to their definition of the world. It is a threat to the way what they think reality is.
if black skin represents this much of a threat to white society, the mitigation black people have to do to protect themselves from the backlash to that threat is immense. Frantz Fanon wrote in Black Skin, White Masks,
"The Martinican does not compare himself with the white man qua father, leader, god. He compares himself with his fellow against the pattern of the white man."
Killmonger compares himself with T'Challa against a pattern given to him by a white Western society. A common criticism of superhero films is that superheroes always fight someone who's just an evil version of themselves, and Black Panther culminates in T'Challa in a Black Panther suit fighting Killmonger in a Black Panther suit. This bothered me too the first time I saw the film. After such a fantastic, operatic storyline, the climax of the film is two CGI men hitting each other? However, this scene actually brings the color coding of the film to the fore, with T'Challa and Killmonger smashing into each other and releasing bright bursts of color, reflecting the Black Panther suits they, as we were shown earlier, chose from a set. Killmonger, comparing himself against the pattern of the white man, has chosen what in a modern white society means wealth and royalty: gold. T'Challa, heir to the throne of Wakanda, son of a proud tradition of a country that has never been colonized, wears purple. The same purple as Juba of Mauritania wore, and the same purple that the film shows as the power of the Black Panther. The heart-shaped herb, the vibranium flower that grows only in Wakanda, blooms purple. Purple, a color usually kept away from men in the West, is especially meaningful in this film that seeks to reclaim pride in ways that it's been denied. T'Challa wears purple in a powerful way. T'Challa's masculinity is not fragile, is not toxic, and doesn't seek to put others down. He just wants to do what's right and good, and doesn't position himself above the women around him by virtue of being a man. In fact, the women in his life argue with him as equals or overrule him as people with more authority or experience, and he respects their opinions, wisdom, and expertise. Killmonger, on the other hand, uses his girlfriend as a tool to help him get what he wants, and then disposes of her when another man tries to use her against him. Killmonger's point of view is so thoroughly colonized that when he passes through into the world beyond during his inaugural ceremony, he meets his father in their Oakland apartment, rather than their ancestors on the African plains, as T'Challa did. Only at the end does he realize that his oppression is so permeating and so internalized that he could never have been the Wakandan king he wanted to be. During their fight, T'Challa tells him,
You want to see us become just like the people you hate so much. Divide and conquer the land as they did.
Nah, I learned from my enemies. Beat them at their own game.
You have become them. You will destroy the world, Wakanda included.
As Killmonger dies, he shows that he has realized the extent of this internalized oppression. In this moment, he sees how he was led to this conclusion, and T'Challa sees it as well, which is what ultimately provokes T'Challa to reach out and help people outside of Wakanda. What they both see in this moment is that without an outside force helping him through, Killmonger couldn't escape the colonization of the mind.
Maybe we can still heal you. Why? So you could just lock me up? Nah. Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships. Because they knew death was better than bondage.
I heard all the cool people support Curio on Patreon. Meh.